Hi, my name is Dr. Lisa Kirby, and I'm the director of the Texas Center for Working Class Studies. Today I'm here with Kayla Osborn, who is the first place winner in our Texas Center for Working Class Studies student writing contest. We are very pleased that the center has been able to host this writing contest each year for the past 7 years. And I have to say that the submissions are always wonderful, but this year's were especially good. So I'm going to introduce Kayla, and then she is going to present her paper, which is titled Social Class and Female Autonomy in Literature at the Turn of the Century. Kayla is originally from Alba, Texas, and she was a student at Collin College until the spring of 2020. She's now in her second semester at UTD, where she's studying film and literature. Kayla, we look forward to your paper.
All right. A woman's place in society, a woman's place in the social hierarchy at the end of the 19th century had been established in American culture since the country's inception. The domain of a woman was the home, and it was there she was expected to stay, follow the wishes of the men in charge, and continue the patriarchy as it had always been. But throughout the century, attitudes slowly began to change, and this reflection is visible in the literature of the time. Women from the rich, poor, and emerging middle classes began to demand and receive more power, but the ways it manifested varied greatly between these classes. In Kate Chopin's The Storm, Mary E. Wilkins Freeman's A New England Nun, and Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper, social class plays a major role in the power, or lack thereof, each female protagonist wields in their story. A backwoods Louisiana deluge sets the scene for Calixta and Alcée to have an illicit tryst in Chopin's The Storm. While Calixta's social rank is not explicitly stated, there are clues to help us understand where she fits in comparison to the other protagonists. Calixta is working at her sewing machine and bringing clothes in off the line when Alcée happens to show up just before the violent downpour. Although her husband Bobino mentions a woman named Sylvie who might be helping her that day, it appears that Calixta does not have a full-time servant, something expected by anyone with the funds to afford it. When Bobino and Bibi return home after the storm, quote, Calixta was preparing supper. She had set the table and was dripping coffee at the hearth. Something a woman of higher rank would have, something a woman of higher class would have servants to attend to. These examples point to Calixta being the lowest class of the women in these selected stories. However, it could be argued that she has the most autonomy of any of the protagonists. It is established before their return to the house that Calixta often gets frustrated with her husband and son when they upset her household order. They take care to brace themselves before showing up home covered in mud. Quote, then, prepared for the worst, the meeting with an over-scrupulous housewife, they enter cautiously at the back door. Not only does she rule the home she shares with Bobino, she also does as she pleases in that home with no guilt or concern for her husband. After the storm and the tryst had ended, quote, Calixta watched Alcée right away. She lifted her pretty chin to the air and laughed aloud. This does not point to any feelings of wrongdoing or guilt in her actions. To the contrary, Calixta seems refreshed and more relaxed with her family than ever before. One could interpret this as Calixta comfortably flexing her own power in her own domain. A woman of higher rank would have more scrutiny and more to lose than Calixta if her spontaneous affair were to be found out. While she may not have the luxuries of a rich woman, Calixta shows the reader that social status was not the only way a woman could have power. A little higher up the social ladder than Calixta is Louisa Ellis, the title character in Freeman's story, A New England Nun. After the death of her mother and brother, Louisa spends the years apart from her betrothed, living alone in her family home. But Louisa did not find this time spent alone a burden. Instead, she found that solitary life suited her well. Freeman wrote, Louisa's feet had turned into a path so straight and unswerving that it could only meet a check at her grave, and so narrow that there was no room for anyone at her sides. More so than Calixta, Louisa has her material needs met. While Louisa also sews, she does so not out of necessity or enterprise, but for the simple meditative joy she finds in intricate needlework. Louisa also has the unique freedom to do as she pleases when it comes to her decision of following through with her 14-year-old engagement to Joe. While Calixta most likely married for economic reasons, Louisa's inheritance is what gives her a pass in society to be an unmarried, independent woman if she chooses. The women of New England do look down on Louisa and her choices, but the extenuating circumstances of her extended engagement and death of her immediate family allow Louisa to be the perfectly arranged master of her own domain. The thought of leaving her orderly home to live with Joe fills her with dread. Freeman describes Louisa rising and going amongst her neat maidenly possessions. She felt as one looking her last upon the faces of dear friends. When Louisa discovers the secret romance between Joe and his mother's helper, she doesn't feel betrayed or hurt. She feels relieved. It doesn't trouble her now to follow her own wishes and break the engagement, as she knows she will be allowing Joe to follow his heart as well. While an upper class woman might be expected to marry in order to create alliances or continue family lines, and a lower class woman might be forced to marry in order to survive, Louisa's special circumstances allow her to keep on living in her preferred world of her own making. Contrary to Louisa's simple, solitary life, the character of Jane in Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper comes from a much higher station in life. An upper class woman, or as an upper class woman, her family is able to afford at least 2 servants in their summer home and have the luxury of wanting for nothing. Jane is married to and comes from a family of doctors, a very distinguished profession, which requires funding for education and to maintain a practice. In order to treat his wife's worsening anxiety and depression, John rents a colonial mansion for the summer for her to relax in and partake in the popular rest cure. Although she recently had a baby and has a massive home and gardens to explore, Jane is relegated to the nursery where she and her husband sleep. She is told to spend her time easing her mind and not exerting herself in any way, including reading, writing, drawing, walking, or any kind of mental or physical stimulation. Although her husband's intentions are good, this rest cure is what eventually sends her to the brink of insanity. Jane pleaded multiple times with her husband to leave, saying, quote, "I told him I really was not gaining here. I wished he would take me away." These requests fell on well-meaning but deaf ears. Her husband infantilizes her by replying, "What is it, little girl? Don't go walking like that. You'll get cold." Unfortunately for Jane, women in this time were seldom taken seriously in matters of their own health. The act of treating Jane like a naughty child when she voices concern for her own health reflects her husband's, and therefore society's, opinion of women whose behavior deviated from the norm, even if it comes to the expense of her own well being. An argument could be made that if Jane were from a lower class, she would not have had the luxury of participating in the rest cure, and she would have no choice but to help carry the burden of running a household. This activity could have helped stimulate her mind and quite possibly could have saved her from the insanity caused by her forced understimulation. While the lives of the women at the turn of the century didn't always reflect the lives of the protagonist in The Storm, A New England Nun, and The Yellow Wallpaper, not all women lived in a remote countryside where conditions were perfect for romantic tryst, nor did many have the luck to inherit a comfy home to live in peace, and even less had the misfortune to be born upper class and develop a mental illness. However, these 3 stories illustrate the difference in women's lives in 3 different social classes and how each woman could control their spheres and what would happen if that control was taken away.
Very nice. Thank you, Kayla. What a wonderful paper. I really like how you pick these 3 characters who were written around the same time, but were from very different stations in life, very different social classes, and you kind of find these commonalities with them, and then also some differences too. It's a really great paper, a really interesting paper. So thank you. What made you decide to write about that particular topic?
So this was kind of based on a paper I had to write for my American Literature 2 class. We had read a handful of stories also from this time period. And these were, we might have read about 5 or 6 stories during this class so far. And, I had to pick from a couple of these and kind of compare and contrast them. And those 3 really stuck out to me. I'm personally a fan of uh, uh, Kate Chopin. I read The Storm a couple semesters ago, or not The Storm, The Awakening, and that kind of became one of my new favorite books. And The Yellow Wallpaper was just it feels like a Twilight Zone story to me. I just enjoyed it so much. Just that it's not supernatural, but it almost to Jane, it almost feels like it. It's just so otherworldly and creepy. It's so fun. And then also just the kind of there's just an idyllic, almost kind of perfection in A New England Nun
Mhm.
that's kind of put there. And it's something nice to kind of live in. All of these stories they were just fun to like kind of explore and, thinking about these people as real people and where they would fit in society. It was kind of like an interesting look just at the way it might have been in that time. And I don't know, I really enjoyed making this paper, honestly.
Well, and you did a great job with it. And again, I think it's just an interesting kind of comparison and contrast of how these women do exert independence and autonomy in very different ways, in ways that were certainly unexpected for their time period. And yet their social class, I especially like your point about how, with Jane and the yellow wallpaper, had she been from a different social class, the rescue wouldn't have even been an option, right? And so it makes you really think through even medicine at the time and mental health treatment and how even that varied by class as it still does today in many ways, right? So,
Absolutely.
wow. Well, congratulations again. We're so proud of you. You had a wonderful paper. And I just want to say congratulations to you and all the essay contest winners again.
Thank you very much.